and welcome everyone. My name is Rizwana Manjur, and today I have with me Kathy Song Novelli, SVP Marketing Communications at Jubilo. Hi Kathy, how are you?
Hi Raz, I'm great. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. I'm doing well. I know it's 7 p.m. for you there. It's 10 a.m. here in Singapore, but I'm glad we're getting to do this virtually. Now, before we start off the conversation, could you let our audience members know a little bit about who we're hearing from today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Kathy Song Novelli. I always introduce myself as first and foremost mother to two daughters, Grace and Emerson, which is why I've always got this necklace on. But I think the reason why I'm here is not because of that. It's because I'm currently the SVP of Marketing and Communications at Jubilo, the virtual and hybrid event platform. And before Jubilo, I held a variety of marketing and monetization leadership roles at brands such as Rakuten, Quantcast, Pandora, Yahoo, and MySpace if I want to really age myself.
I remember using MySpace, so I'm giving away my age as well.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Jubilo and what made you join Jubilo?
Yeah, well, what was really fascinating is before I joined Jubilo, I had been overseeing events and went through the very dramatic pivot that the entire industry had to take, along with now who our target audience is. And so myself sort of went through the challenges of trying to make that shift. And what I found really fascinating about Jubilo was that well before the pandemic hit, they had already been in the space of events and trying to increase event engagement and really perfecting the science of understanding what's going to engage event attendees more than other elements. And so to me, I was looking at the space and I knew that virtual and hybrid is going to be the future, right? I knew that as a marketer, I had been able to recognize that we were getting 10x the reach with our events, right? Reach that we never got before. We got that reach with incredible ROI, and we were also getting really deep data on our audience that we never got before. So I knew from a marketer perspective that virtual and hybrid was not going to go away because marketers are not about to walk away from that, right? And so just the category alone was really interesting to me. And if you look at the history, right, some of the brands that I had worked with, they had a commonality, and that was sort of the path I had been taking my career. And that was that I was looking to launch brands and grow brands that were not only themselves trying to grow, but we were at the same time trying to grow the category because the category itself was new. When I was at MySpace, Facebook didn't exist. Social media was not a thing that marketers invested in. So we had to essentially convince the industry to that social media was a worthy channel for marketing dollars. And so now we're sort of in this space where we are equally sort of trying to convince marketers that, the virtual platform is a key component of their tech stack, that they can't, sort of see as a fringe technology that they'll consider once in a while. So for a number of reasons, I was deeply fascinated by the industry, and also just the shift it was taking, and Jubilo in particular, because they were one of the very, very few that had event expertise before the pandemic hit. There's all these other players who sort of jumped into the space because they saw money signs, right? But it wasn't their expertise nor their history.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, we've been in the event space ourselves with our award shows and our conferences. And, we've had to also reskill and upskill ourselves to kind of understand the world of virtual. It's not easy having to speak to a camera and laugh at your own jokes and things like that, right?
Totally, yeah.
So it takes a lot of, a shift in mindset as well to embrace this new world of hybrid and digital. So I know that Jubilo, you guys have been in the space for a long time, but you've also evolved your functions and you went through a massive rebranding this year. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. So what was interesting before, and I think any brand within the space could empathize with the fact that we were just running and trying to keep up with all of the needs of the industry. And I think branding for ourselves and other brands just sort of took a back seat. And so what we realized when I came on board in April of this year, at the very beginning of April, was that we really needed to hone in on the uniqueness of what makes Hubelo different. So for us, when we say that we are the virtual and hybrid event platform built for engagement and excellence and event excellence, the engagement part I sort of touched on before, right? We had the history, and because of that, we knew exactly the platform we needed to build. The engagement had to be the core of it. But more importantly, I realized that through all of the conversations with my network of CMO friends and event organizers, that the challenge they had over the last year was actually in executing, because event organizers, and I'm not speaking ill of them, I am including myself in this category, but we are, first and foremost, we are avid sort of methodical organizers, and we're creatives, right? We are experience creators, but what we're not are technical AV producers. And a lot of these platforms sort of positions themselves as so simple and intuitive, right? Go, you're good. But, the reality of events is when you're trying to get your speakers on stage, even a virtual stage, when you're trying to manage a million things, and you've got sponsors and exhibitors who have questions about the platforms and things they can do, it is impossible. And so what Hubelo uniquely has is a 24/7 customer success team that is dedicated to your events. So they're there to help you plan. They're there the day of, most importantly, right? You need an army of support. And then they help you after the event. And so we knew that we had to very actively be in market talking about how Hubelo is the platform for engagement and event excellence, and really hone in on that. So earlier this year, so I started April, May was when we rebranded, and June was all about sort of our upgraded platform release. So it has been a really crazy 3 months, but aside from the product pivot that the brand took really all of last year, this was our year to really introduce the brand to the market, help them to understand how we are uniquely different from all the others who just sort of randomly jumped into the space, and let them know that there's an alternative, right? Like, they don't have to be thrown into the wild on their own and figure out how to be tech AV producers overnight.
Yeah, you really hit the ground running, Kathy.
Yeah.
No, but it's so interesting because I completely resonate with what you're saying. To have that 24/7 support during an event is so important, especially because technology changes so quickly. You want someone there as almost like a safety net. You might know the processes by heart, but you still want someone who's there to catch you just in case something happens.
Yes. So especially at an event.
Yeah, exactly. And you have, as much as you try to control all the settings, you never know what's gonna happen. And it doesn't matter if it's a live event or a virtual event, this always happens. So kudos to you and the team for having that 24/7 support. I think that's really commendable.
Yeah. I think it's key, and for a lot of people, I think it's a luxury they can't consider. And for us, we just consider it a must-have.
Yeah, absolutely. And are you seeing some trends in the space of virtual events now emerge? Because I feel that over the past year, we're kind of getting used to the idea of doing things virtually. But are there any new trends that are starting to emerge now?
There's a good number of trends. One trend that I'm very much hoping will end very quickly is a trend that I understand, and a problem that I even faced myself. And that was when all of this first hit and we realized that we're going to have to change our complete event strategy and go virtual. I think what happened was event organizers thought about, okay, if this is going to be virtual, I'm going to go into my toolkit. And when I think about virtual events, we're doing webinars, right? Which sort of continues the Zoom fatigue, right? Like it wasn't about how do we take our in-person events that are engaging and, you know, networking and, you know, really connecting people on a meaningful level, and how do we bring that experience online? It was, how do we do events online, and let's just do that, right? And I totally get, I did some of those as well last year, but what I'm seeing now, which is an amazing trend that I'm very excited about, is people are realizing virtual, hybrid, it's not going to go away, and they're rethinking it, right? They're flipping it, as we mentioned, and really thinking, okay, how do I make my virtual experience an experience and truly unique? And so I get really excited about that trend and sort of seeing how people are looking to break ground and reimagine what virtual events will be. But secondarily, I think the other big trend right now is hyper amounts of testing, which I applaud, because the world is sort of opening up at different rates. I think there are different segments of audiences that have different interests and, you know, different degrees of comfort with being out at events. So you see a lot of brands and events sort of testing the grounds of hybrid, sort of sticking with mostly virtual and testing out a lot of micro in-person events and figuring out how to best bridge those experiences. So that trend I'm very excited about, because I think that key is going to be the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Did anything surprise you? I mean, when we were looking at the trends that are emerging, are there any trends that surprised you?
I think the trend I spoke about before, how event organizers sort of defaulted toward webinar type events, was the most surprising. I think, you know, and I get the whole comfort with not reinventing overnight and just sort of doing what you're comfortable with. So a great example, not just sort of the boring webinar type event, but it felt like we were doing virtual for the first time. And that was a weird trend where I was like, every industry event I go to is sort of awful. And it wasn't just for like the first month or two. It really, most of the events that I went to in 2020 were not great. And I even remember feeling really excited about one event that I was going to, because they seemed to be sprinkling in a lot of entertainment. The entertainment that they sprinkled in were like comedians, where comedians, you usually react with a crowd.
Yeah.
And so when you've got a comedian and it's dead silent, it just doesn't execute right. So, you know, I think I was surprised at the fact that more brands, more events weren't pushing boundaries as the year went on last year.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I agree with you. It was a year of hits and misses. You know, I attend a lot of press conferences that have now become virtual, right? So it's almost like sometimes you can just sort of see the person reading off the script of the press release that you're going to get 20 minutes later. So you're like, okay, sure. But then it's gotten a lot better. It's a lot more interactive now. They do kind of try to marry the physical element, like they'll send you a cup of coffee or, you know, something to make you feel like, hey, I'm seen, even though I'm behind a camera. You know, you can't really see me on the day, but I'm on your mind. So I find that really, really interesting. And I completely agree with you on the Zoom fatigue. I know most of the people that I speak to on a daily basis now, they want to have face-to-face interactions outside. You know, even if it's just going for a walk to discuss something, I feel like that's still better than having a Zoom conversation sometimes, right?
Totally.
But at the same time, I don't know if virtual is going away anytime soon. And it's really still quite difficult to get that same level of engagement. So I guess my question to you then is, in the near future, say 5 years from now, will virtual still hold the same amount of prominence?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I've got a different vision, and I hope it comes to life. I believe it will, mostly because of all of the promising work that I see being done by event organizers right now. I feel like fall of this year, we're going to start seeing a lot more virtual events really pushing the boundaries and focusing on engagement, right? Engagement is the #1 KPI for event marketers and event organizers. And so with that in mind, right, I think the big trend, as mentioned, is going to be testing out, dipping toes into micro in-person events, still having the virtual, bridging those attendees all together. And I think what we'll really realize is what is engaging audiences, and through the different segments, right? There are going to be different cohorts of audiences, and how do we sort of build engagement for the majority of these people? And it's going to be different region by region. And I think everyone is thinking, how do I then unify the attendees so they feel like they are all still together? And it really does come down to, like, what are the engagement features that are available to play around with? You know, what I actually love in a virtual environment are the one-on-one matchmaking opportunities. I think it is way more powerful. Like, I'm meeting with people that are truly match made to meet my unique business needs versus like, oh, you're into this technology, we're going to try to hook you up with 10 other people that have that technology, versus really finding solutions to my needs. And so I think that with all of this sort of testing, learning, iterating, we are going to then see by next year, you know, the blueprint that is working for everyone. And I touched on earlier how I think I'm thinking about events totally differently, because to me, a great example is hybrid is not new. Every sporting event, every major sporting event is hybrid, right? You've got your in-person attendees and you've got the people watching on TV. And the people watching on TV, they have benefits actually that people in person don't. They get to hear the commentary, they get to see the replays, they get to hear all the stats. Like, there are benefits to watching it on TV, and then there's benefits to actually being there in person, of course, right? The energy and the being with the crowd and everything. And I think that to me is the North Star for our industry. It's how do we make virtual as exciting and as sort of all-encompassing as being there in person. And it's a challenge. It's the challenge for all of us, but I am looking forward to solving that challenge over the next year.
Kathy, that's such an interesting example. I never thought of it that way. That, like, yes, absolutely. When you're watching a game on TV, you're often, you know, having a lot more insight as to, you know, the strategy behind it, what's going on the field. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, no, it's funny. When that dawned on me, it started changing my mind on everything, right? And it made me and my team really rethink, like, what else can we do? And then how do we take all of those ideas as event marketers ourselves? How do we bring those next level ideas to our product and our engineering team to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I know you mentioned that's sort of the North Star that you're heading towards, but what advice would you have for event organizers right now who might be struggling to engage their audience? Because, you know, we're all to a certain point a little bit tired of, you know, just having webinars after webinars after webinars.
Totally. You know, in my opinion, what was the blueprint for successful events before still is. And an event organizer their event can only be as successful as the team that supports them. And I think that that's going to be key, because once an event organizer has the right platform with the right support, with the right vendors and the team all there, they can get back to the creativity of, as we discussed, figuring out what's going to wow their audience and truly engage them. But the fact is like, building virtual events that are truly engaging and really successful and get a lot of positive attendee feedback are those that, you know, have engagement and opportunities plugged in throughout the event, right? So Hubelo, obviously our platform is built for engagement. We've got the industry's largest suite of engagement and gamification features. So it's really easy to sort of sprinkle them throughout, right? And I think event organizers need to think a little bit differently about their run of show and how much more, how many more polls and contests and sort of breaks in which you say, hey, right now is the right time to, you know, set up some meetings and, you know, during our break, encourage you to meet in our one-on-one lounges, but actually breaking in your session to inspire people to set up some of those, right? It's like, hey, the matchmaking tool has already done some work for you. Why don't you go set some up, right? And I think plugging those in throughout the event and very regularly asking for engagement, right? Like, now, how many of you have experienced Zoom fatigue, right? And everyone's pushing their emojis, right? Like, I think little in emojis is a huge thing. Like, that is a relatively new feature for us. And who knew that this is the most coveted feature that attendees want? They don't want to chat, they want to respond with emojis. And so it's sort of being in touch with what is going to engage attendees, what's going to get them to lean in more, download more content, visit more booths. You know, I think it's a totally different formula than in person. And I think what's great is with virtual, you get that behavioral data that tells you what your attendees loved, what they didn't, you know, what got them to engage. So you can actually take that data, see what worked well, and make each event better and better. So, you know, I'd say for any event organizer who is struggling to get that attendee engagement, the most important thing is really getting that data so you can have a benchmark and continue to improve. If you don't have that, or you think, well, you know, virtual isn't going to be our path to success, then, you know, you're really missing out on a lot of goals that will allow you to not only create amazing events virtually, but also hybrid down the road.
Kathy, I mean, I'm learning so much from you. If I had an emoji right now, it would be the one with the exploding head, you know, the brain. Yeah. That would be my emoji for this moment.
That's one of my favorites.
Let me ask you a little bit in terms of that data to be collected to better understand what is driving engagement. Does Hubelo then provide this to your partners?
Absolutely, it's core. So when I talked about our customer success teams, you know, pre, during the event and post, a lot of the support that they provide after the event is, you know, that every customer gets access to their own dashboard. So they can see what worked, what didn't. It's really sort of easy to understand. That said, you can also download all of the data and take many different cuts of it. And what they will do is essentially help you understand that data, you know, because not only can the dashboard take different views. So for example, as an event marketer, I don't just want to know overall what content was more interesting to the attendees. I actually want to know by cohort, right? What was interesting to EMCs versus associations, and, you know, what was the demographic or regional split of people who visited our booths and our sponsors, right? And so I like to really cut the data and see what insights I can get there. And so our dashboard enables you to see things by segment, by cohort, but if you want to look at it at an even more granular level, our success teams can not only help you do that, but we've got templates, for example, on like how to best up-level that story for your executives, for your stakeholders. So, you know, they are there to help you tell the story of how the event performed with all of your stakeholders.
Oh, I love that, because we have so much data at our disposal these days, but then the
Yes.
true magic comes from actually what story does that data tell us? What insight
Totally.
do we get? And so the fact that you guys can provide that adds a whole layer of support for the teams executing the events.
Yes. And one thing we always sort of go back to is it not only helps event organizers understand what's working, what they can do more of to be more successful next time, maybe what's not working, but it also really gives directional information to the entire marketing organization. If you know certain sessions were really hot, then that can help drive your content strategy after that. That can help drive your advertising campaigns, your social stories. So there's a lot that it actually feeds into beyond just events.
Absolutely. I'm taking down notes, Kathy. These are really, really important insights. I want to also ask you, for our brand marketers who are watching this, would you have a similar sort of advice for them? Because, some of them might be more inclined, their brands might be more experiential in nature, and they're used to having big offline events that get the consumers together, get a party going. What advice would you have for them to kind of replicate that kind of fun? Or are we reaching too far?
I don't think we're reaching too far, but I do think we are a ways away from experiencing those again, if ever, right? At least to that magnitude. I remember every year going to Salesforce's Dreamforce in San Francisco, and man, it was packed. And they had blocks and blocks of San Francisco carved out.
Yes.
And while they were fun and there were a lot of experiential things, I think a major shift that happened with the pandemic was not only limiting our ability to have big crowds and small spaces, that's almost, tangential. But I think what happened was the psychology of event attendees shifted. So now, if you talk to anyone, I think they will tell you that their definition of work-life balance has changed. I think there are major cohorts of people who want to get out, myself included. There are people who are hyper concerned with health safety and are not comfortable. And what we need to think about is we think about opening the world back up, and at what point we might be able to have either micro events, mid-size events, and if we could ever do those large-scale events, is really listening to our audiences. Because the fact is, as much as I am excited, I went to one of my first association events last night in the last year and a half. And it was fantastic, but it was small, it was outdoors, so it was great. But the thing that we joked about was, as much as I want to go to more events in person, and I will travel to do so, I can honestly say those events I used to go to, like in Florida, that lasted 6 days long, that is never happening again. Like, as much as I want to get back to the new normal, my redefinition of work-life balance is like, no, I'll go for 2 days, not 6, and I'll do the rest virtually. And so I think that's what we need to think about is, if you want to do that mega event, we got to get a pulse of the audience. I don't really know many people who want to go back to the mega event, nor do they want to go to the week-long events. So it's like, what do the attendees want? And how do you deliver that, right? Because you could still get that reach, you could still get that engagement virtually, and sort of marry and mix. And it's finding the right mixture for the right region at the right time. I think if you went to certain states in the United States right now that are starting to blow up again because those states don't really believe in vaccinations, potentially, those states are not going to see any kinds of big events anytime soon. But here in California, they're more of a possibility. So, I think it's testing out the market, testing out what your audiences are willing and interested in.
Yeah. And so if I ask you, I know I've taken up a lot of your time, but I know, and you've touched on my last question a little bit, but I still have to ask you, where do you personally think the future of our event industry lies, and how can we right now get ourselves ready for it? Because everything we seem to have planned over the last few years got thrown out the window. So we don't know what's next. So how do we then ready ourselves for it?
I don't know if you could ever be ready, but I do very much recommend for every event marketer, every event organizer out there to have a plan B and have a plan C, right? And it's for every sort of crazy thing that can happen. Before, when we planned events, the only crazy plan Bs that we had were usually for weather. And that was sort of it. It was like, well, if it rains, we're going to go into this conference or this ballroom, right? But we never planned for what if, you know, something really crazy like a pandemic happens, or what if, like something that I never really planned for, what if speakers don't show up because their flights don't come through, right? Like I just got very lucky in the past, but I do know event organizers who were always planning plan Bs and plan Cs for every possible thing that could go wrong. So I think that has to be key for us in the future, a lot more than it was. But, you know, like I discussed, the future I'm excited for, I think because it's not totally clear, it feels to me like when I was at MySpace, like I knew there was something with social media and, you know, that it was going to be the future. I didn't know how much. I certainly didn't know it would impact the world as much as it has today, but I was so excited because I could see the possibility. And that's where I feel like we are with events. Like I talked about, I think if we take that model of sporting events and truly get creative as an industry, I hear little gems of amazing ideas here and there, but I think there's going to be a model that starts to get established. You know, some brands are going to kill it, and they are going to find that recipe for how to make the virtual experience as engaging, if not more engaging, right? With their own ways of engaging and the formats that they bring forth. You know, I think the more immersive experiences get, which are getting more and more so, like the event that we had just 2 weeks ago, we had one virtual stage where we had teammates from India and teammates from Denver, Colorado share a stage, you know, and I've only seen that a few times.
Wow.
I saw it with Barack Obama and Oprah Winfrey, like maybe a month ago, and I was wowed then. But the thing is it made you feel like you were in the room with them. And I think as we start pushing more and more boundaries, virtual events will become a whole new model of possibilities. So I can't wait for it to get to the point where it's like sporting events, right? And virtual has its audience who prefer virtual. People who want to be in person have their audience they prefer in person, but the reach will be exponential. But, you know, I think that reimagination of events will extend to every event, you know, not just trade shows and conferences, but to concerts. I've got a whole model there where I think it's going to bring a whole new revenue channel to every recording artist. But I think just the redefinition of event will happen. And I think it's going to happen over the next 2 years. So I wish I knew how, but I think we'll see that over the next year.
Kathy, this has been so inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing with us so openly your insights and your vision for the future. I'm absolutely inspired. And you know what? I feel for our friends in the events industry. They've had a hard year. And I'm sure this is only the start of wonderful beginnings as markets start to open up. So thank you so much for joining me and giving us this nuggets of information that we can take away today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a joy. I loved it.